Welcome back to the Jmull Show on a Monday, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. When we got big baseball things to talk about, we bring in a guy who knows a lot more about baseball than I do. 110 Sports is Chris Brown. Chris, how you doing?
Doing great, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Always appreciate it. Now we've got a World Series matchup after a wild game last night, like you were talking about.
So after this game, I was torn. And I want to ask you the same question that I was sort of pondering with. After this game, did you feel like the Dodgers went out and won this game, or that the Braves, that the bigger story was the Braves' mistakes that you just can't make against a team like the Dodgers?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I'm gonna say a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was sort of the Braves were in the position here. They had the advantage, and then of course, like you talked about earlier in the show, that sloppy defensive, base running mistakes that they made that you just can't make in Game 7 of the NLCS against a team as good as the Dodgers. You just can't give away, outs. You can't give away opportunities like that. So, on the one hand, that's a big storyline. I mean, that's kind of what it is one thing I'm thinking about this morning. But at the same time, it doesn't matter unless it doesn't really end up hurting them unless the Dodgers capitalize on it.
Right.
And that's what they did. So, the Dodgers with the Kike Hernandez home run, with the Cody Bellinger home run, they were able to capitalize like we know that they're able to do. And, obviously, I think momentum matters. I just would say that, and it's this thing where it all kind of changed for the Braves with those base running problems. I should say. So, it's impossible to know how it would have gone had they handled things differently. It could have been a bigger inning for them. Of course, it could have been they could have scored more runs in that inning, than even what was just on the bases. So it's impossible to know. But I think I guess again, kind of a little bit of a cop-out answer. They blew it. And you have a Dodgers team that stepped up and, showed that those star power that they have with Bellinger, with Kike Hernandez. And so they were able to capitalize on it. It's not a mistake a Braves team can make against a team like the Dodgers.
If you play the first and fourth innings, the top of the first and the top of the fourth innings over 10 times, how many times do the Braves walk away with more than 2 runs? And in the first inning, you had guys on first and second without, after Ozuna drives in Acuna, so you got guys on first and second with no outs, and that turns into a double play and a strikeout to end the inning. And then the top of the fourth, you have guys, nobody out, guys on second and third, and they don't get any runs after that point either. I was genuinely baffled that they only walked away with 1 run in those 2 situations. Of course, Albies had already scored in the top of the fourth, but I mean, those 2 innings I thought were 2 massive turning points, because I felt like they should have walked away with at least 3 runs between those 2 innings, and if not more.
Yeah, I mean, that was it right there for the Braves, because it was. It was hard for me to believe going into this game, and especially as we entered the later innings, that the Dodgers weren't going to be able to score a couple runs. Like this idea that they would just go down, 3-0 or 2-0 seemed pretty unlikely to me, given the bats that they have and their ability of pretty much anybody in that lineup to hit a home run. So it was one of those things where, like you said, I mean, you have to. If you're the Braves, you can't be content with 1 run. You get into those situations. And I mean, not that they were content with it, but you can't, when you have that advantage like that, when you have those 2 runners on and no out, when you have that situation, you just have to do better than score 1 run against a Dodgers team that can hit a home run and at the blink of an eye, and all of a sudden your 1 run is just balanced out, neutralized. So yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. It's just one of those things where, yeah, I think 8 times out of 10. Or something like that, 9 times out of 10, they're walking out of those 2 innings combined with 3 or 4 or 5 runs.
Right.
But, it's part of it's bad luck, part of it's good Dodgers pitching, but part of it's just you got to capitalize, and the Braves didn't.
What was the most important decision that Dave Roberts made in this game? Is it not throwing Kershaw? Is it letting Urias go for longer for 3 innings in relief? Is it not putting Kiki Hernandez in earlier in the game for Jock Peterson when he was going up against a left-handed pitcher, and Hernandez, likes hitting off of left-handed pitchers? Was there a decision that Dave Roberts made in this game that sticks out to you? I thought it was a really well-managed game from him. For a guy who is on the hot seat in every way if the Dodgers don't end up winning a World Series, I thought it was a really well-managed game from him.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. It's coming from a manager who's under a lot of pressure and who's been criticized, I think, some fairly, some unfairly, for his pitching decisions in past playoff appearances. And this was one that was really well managed for him. I mean, it certainly didn't get off to a good start with May and Gonsolin both giving up a run or two. But especially down the stretch in this game, and part of it, there's not much you can do about that. But I think the decision for me was letting Julio Urias go 3 innings and not bringing in somebody else for the ninth. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, of course, but I think it's like you talked about. It's one of those things where they had such uncertainty in the ninth inning. Kenley Jansen looks like he might be fixed/better now, but that's one of those things that could change quickly, and he doesn't have a long track record of success this postseason. And then, you could go to Kershaw, you could go to somebody else, but I think that Dave Roberts made the right decision in not overthinking it and not thinking, we got to bring in somebody else. Like, Urias had it going. He had it working for him. He was on a roll. He had that momentum, and I think it made perfect sense for them to stick with him, and it paid off. So that was the move for me that I was like glad. I was a little bit surprised to see, actually pleasantly surprised from the Dodgers' perspective, to see Roberts stick with him, and it paid off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's not like he was about to face the lineup for a second time necessarily. He had gotten through the meat of the order in the top of the 8th, so it was clearly I like you, was surprised that he was on the mound for the 9th inning. I did think it was the right move, though. In a hypothetical Game 7 of the World Series, because there's a way that the Dodgers can do the pitching rotation for the World Series that puts Urias on the mound to start Game 7. Would you rather him start Game 7 or be, he goes Game 4 as a starter, and then you've got him in a situation like this in a Game 7 of the World Series to throw him into 3 innings, middle, late part of these games in Game 7? Would you rather him have the ball to start, or have that luxury of bringing him out of the bullpen if you need him?
Yeah, I think in an ideal situation, I like what he's done out of the bullpen this postseason, and I like his flexibility, because he's a guy who can go out there and get you high leverage outs, but also a guy who can pitch like we saw last night, 3 innings, 4 innings, because he's a starter. He's made 1 start this postseason, 3 out of the bullpen, and he has a 0.56 ERA. I mean, he's just been incredible for them. So I kind of like the idea of, there's a situation in which they need him to start because, they just don't, they've used too many of their guys. But I think in an ideal situation, I'd love to save him if I'm Dave Roberts for, not necessarily, I'm not saying you don't use him in games 4, 5, or 6 or anything to save him, but I like the idea of having him available out of the bullpen in this series for those sort of 3 inning saves, or those high leverage get you out of a jam and pitch another inning sort of situations, because that's a situation where he's really thrived this postseason.
Speaking about the World Series, we won't dive too deeply into this. I don't want to put you on any sort of weird situation if you haven't gotten a chance to break down the World Series quite as extensively as you'd like to. But first of all, can you get 2 more different teams than the Rays and the Dodgers? 2 great baseball teams, of course, and I think that was my first takeaway here, is that despite a 60-game season and a weird playoffs, you've still got the 2 best teams in baseball this year playing in the World Series. But they got there in very, very different ways with very, very different makeups. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a good point, because these are 2 teams who are showing that 2 completely different approaches, 2 completely different styles can be very effective. Like you talked about, the Rays It's all about the pitching for them for the most part. It's all about, quantity of high-level arms, the fact that they don't have to stick with one guy for 6 or 7 innings, one starter, because they've got a huge bullpen of guys who can come in and throw 97, and they know that they've got another 2 or 3 starters who can go out there. Who you're not striving, you're not looking for starting pitching depth. That's what I should be saying. They've got plenty of starting pitching depth, and they've got bullpen depth, and it's all high quality depth. And so they're winning those low-scoring games with a couple of big home runs from a couple of players, and they're getting guys that step up out of nowhere, like Randy Arozarena and Ji-Man Choi. And then you have the Dodgers, who their star power won out in this series eventually. It didn't look like it would always be that way, but we know what they're capable of. We know what they have. Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager, named NLCS MVP. They have the star power that's winning out for them. And you match that up against a Rays team that a lot of maybe casual baseball fans may be able to only name like a couple of players on that roster.
Right.
Meanwhile, every player on the Dodgers roster is pretty well known for the most part. So it's a really interesting comparison of these two teams with different styles. I can't wait to see how it plays out.
So the World Series that comes to my mind first when thinking about teams that, at least from a money and stars perspective, meeting in the World Series is in 2007 when the Red Sox and the Rockies met, and the Rockies won 90 games that season. The Red Sox won 96, but the Red Sox are the team with, your Dustin Pedroias, your David Ortiz's, Manny Ramirez, Jason Varitek, and against a Rockies team that was similar to the Rays, not necessarily from a team makeup, but just from they're not spending a lot of money. They're not a team that is known for how much money they have. The Red Sox dominated that series. Started off with a 13-1 win, and then it just wasn't too terribly close after that. I personally don't think this is how this series is going to go. Do you think that this will be a series where the team with all the firepower is just clearly a little too much like the Red Sox were in that 2007 World Series, or you think the Rays have the ability to make this a different series?
Yeah, I feel like the Rays starting pitching depth alone is going to make it hard for it to be any sort of a huge blowout for the Dodgers. I certainly could see a game where, look, all the Rays pitchers are, many of them are great, but there's still, obviously an opportunity for the Dodgers to, if their bats keep going, to go off on one of those starters and have a huge offensive game and have a blowout in one of these contests. But I would find it hard to believe that we could see a situation where that happens 2 or 3 times. I could see it happening once or twice, but not a ton. The one thing that does concern me, and one area where I could see if the Dodgers were to sort of run away with this series and win in, let's say 5 games or something like that, it would be from the perspective of the Rays' bats kind of cooling down in that Astros series. They won because they had the timely hits and the pitching, but a lot of their guys were slumping at the plate. It was Randy Arozarena and then Mike Zunino, and then that's about it. Their batting average in the ALCS wasn't all that great. They've got a bunch of guys who are struggling. They've got a bunch of guys who are capable of turning that around at a moment's notice, but I would be kind of concerned. I think the way that this series could be over quickly and be kind of lopsided is if Arozarena cools off a little bit and Zunino cools off and nobody else sort of gets on track offensively for the Rays, and then all of a sudden, even if their pitching is good, even if the Dodgers are only scoring 3 or 4 runs a game, then if the Rays are only scoring 1 or 2 runs a game, then that's your series right there. So that's the area in which I could see it being lopsided, but I certainly not predicting that. I think the Rays pitching is good enough that they're going to be in this thing and make it competitive at least, if nothing else.
Does the fact that the Rays almost choked a 3-0 lead make you feel any differently about the Rays?
A little bit. It's interesting because I think it sort of gave them time to sort of expose some of those flaws that they do have in terms of offensively in particular, where, this is a Rays team that's shown they're really resilient. It's a fun group of players. I don't think they're going to come into this series, the World Series, with any sort of like, I don't think they're going to be feeling bad about themselves or doubting themselves because of what happened against the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm confident that they'll be able to put that behind them. But I do think it exposed a little bit some of their flaws, like the offense that could prove concerning. It showed that they're not, they looked like a really almost a perfect team, I want to say. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but they looked kind of just perfect. It's great. And then we kind of see like, okay, there's holes here too. Like their strategy isn't perfect. It doesn't always work. And so it kind of exposed that. And so I don't think it's not necessarily changing my prediction for the World Series, but I think it's something to keep an eye on. And it's something that shows, look, this could be a lopsided World Series.
And that prediction is?
Dodgers in 6. Dodgers in 6, sticking with the prediction. I don't know if I said it in 6 before, but I'm sticking with the Dodgers to win this, and I'm going with it being 6 games. I think it'll be pretty competitive, but I don't think we're going to need a Game 7. That's my guess.
Well, the thing is, the Dodgers need it to not be a Game 7, because if there is a Game 7, the Rays have Charlie Morton, and that's the best pitcher of all time in that situation.
Yeah.
He's just ridiculously good in winner-take-all games. But I think it's going to be exciting, and can't wait for it to get started tomorrow night. Chris, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming and talking baseball.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me.
That's Chris Brown at C Brown Sports on Twitter. If you're not following him, you should be following him. He does a really nice job and has done such all post-season. Coming up next, I got some things to talk about with Week 6 of the NFL season. We'll do that next on the Jmull Show, 110sportsmedia.com.